In the desert of ancient Canaan, a different kind of boy was born. Joseph, the favored son of Jacob and Rachel, his beloved wife, possessed dreams that seemed insane. Yet these dreams led him to an unexpected destiny filled with challenges. Sold into slavery by his own brothers, he was taken to Egypt, where his journey took many twists and turns. From faithful servant to prisoner, Joseph faced betrayals, temptations, and injustices, but his faith remained unshaken. Then, in a surprising twist, he was summoned by Pharaoh to interpret mysterious dreams, and against all odds became the governor of Egypt, saving an entire nation from famine. But the real test was yet to come. When his starving brothers knelt before him, Joseph held the power of vengeance, or forgiveness. Today, let's discover the true strength of Joseph, the dreamer who faced betrayals and injustices to save not only Egypt, but also his own family. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Genesis 50, verse 20. It all starts with a young man named Joseph, the son of Jacob, and his beloved wife Rachel. The Bible describes Joseph as someone special in his father's eyes. Jacob had 12 sons, but Joseph was the most loved. He didn't hide this, and, as a token of his affection, he gave Joseph a colorful coat, something rare and valuable at the time. This coat alone made it clear that Joseph held a special place in his father's heart. Now imagine the effect this had on his brothers. They already disliked the extra attention Joseph was getting, and to make things worse, he started sharing some bizarre dreams in which he was, somehow, above them all. One of the dreams Joseph shared was that they were in the field binding sheaves, and his sheaf stood upright while the sheaves of his brothers gathered around and bowed down to his. You can imagine the reaction, right? His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dreams and what he had said. The tension continued to rise, and soon the brothers could no longer bear hearing about Joseph's dreams. Then, on an ordinary day, the opportunity for revenge appeared. Jacob sent Joseph to the field, where his brothers were tending the flocks, and there they decided to put an end to the dreamer. As Joseph approached, the brothers murmured among themselves, "Here comes that dreamer. Tice, let's kill him and throw his body into one of these cisterns, and say that a wild animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams." Genesis 37:19-20. But one of the brothers, Reuben, intervened, suggesting they only throw him into a cistern, intending to rescue him later. However, before they could act, a caravan of Ishmaelite merchants passed by, and an even more profitable idea arose: sell Joseph as a slave. And so, Joseph was taken to Egypt, chained, with no idea what awaited him. In this moment of pain and betrayal, Joseph could have rebelled or lost hope. But as we will see throughout his life, he believed that God was with him, even when the world seemed to be falling apart. As Psalm 37:5 reminds us, "Commit your way to the Lord. Trust in him, and he will act." In Egypt, Joseph was sold as a slave to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh. Even as a slave, Joseph chose to dedicate himself with integrity. He knew that God was with him, and this caused everything he touched to prosper. Potiphar soon noticed this special talent and gave Joseph increasing responsibilities until he was placed in charge of the entire household. Things were going well, but Joseph would face another trial. Potiphar's wife attempted to seduce him multiple times, but Joseph, loyal to God and Potiphar, always refused her advances. He said, "How could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" Genesis 39:9. Nevertheless, she falsely accused him, and Potiphar, enraged, threw Joseph into prison. Once again, Joseph's life was turned upside down, but even in prison, he continued to trust in God. In prison, Joseph did not go unnoticed. He stood out so much that the warden put him in charge of the other prisoners. This phase teaches us something profound. Even in moments of injustice and pain, God is by our side, shaping us. As it is written in Romans 8:28, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him." Joseph lived this truth in practice. There he met two important prisoners, Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker. Both had intriguing dreams, and Joseph, with the gift that God had given him, interpreted them. He revealed that the cupbearer would be restored to his position, while the baker would be condemned. The The dreams came true exactly as Joseph had said. Before leaving, the cupbearer promised to remember Joseph, but that did not happen. Joseph was forgotten for another 2 years in prison, facing another painful wait. But even in that silence, God was working in his favor. Even when people forget us, God never forgets us, and none of his plans can be thwarted. 2 years later, Pharaoh had 2 dreams that no one could interpret. It was then that the cupbearer finally remembered Joseph and recommended him to Pharaoh. Joseph was quickly brought out of prison and, before the ruler of Egypt, heard the dreams about fat and thin cows and full and dry ears of grain. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears of grain are also 7 years. The dreams are one and the same. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after the others are 7 years, and so are the 7 worthless and scorched ears of grain. They will be 7 years of famine. Genesis 41:26-27. Joseph explained to Pharaoh that these dreams meant 7 years of abundance, followed by 7 years of severe famine. He also suggested a plan to store food during the years of abundance to survive the years of scarcity. Pharaoh was so impressed that he appointed Joseph as the governor of Egypt, the second most powerful man in the country, tasked with saving an entire nation from famine. This passage connects Joseph's story to the teaching. Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. 1 Peter 5:6. The message here is about how humility and obedience to God's principles are rewarded at the right time. Joseph went through numerous humiliations and trials. He was sold into slavery, unjustly imprisoned, and forgotten. Yet he remained faithful and humble, trusting that God had a greater purpose for his life. In due time, God exalted him, bringing him out of prison and making him governor of Egypt. Joseph's life illustrates that by humbling ourselves and trusting in God's will, we can be elevated to fulfill a greater purpose. Just as Peter teaches, exaltation comes in God's time, not ours. Years later, famine spread across all the lands, and Joseph's brothers went to Egypt in search of food, unaware that Joseph was the governor. When they stood before him, Joseph recognized them immediately, but they did not recognize him. He could have taken revenge, but instead, he chose to test them to see if they had changed. After several tense encounters, he finally revealed his identity, and his brothers were terrified, fearing for their lives. Instead of seeking revenge, Joseph chose forgiveness. He told them, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Genesis 50:20. This statement shows us the power of forgiveness and the understanding that God uses even hardships to fulfill his purpose. Have you ever thought about that? The challenges you face today might be pushing you towards the original destiny that God has planned for you. Joseph was unjustly sold and often forgotten by those around him, but all these circumstances worked together for God's plan to be established, and thus Joseph became governor. Joseph embraced his brothers, restoring peace and healing past wounds. He provided a home in Egypt for his entire family and reconciled with them, showing that God's love is greater than any resentment. The life of Joseph is a lesson in perseverance, faithfulness, and trust in God. It teaches us that even in the worst circumstances, we must keep our faith, as God is in control and leading us towards something greater. As written in Proverbs 3 verse 5-6, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight." Joseph's journey challenges us to forgive, to trust in God's plans, and to understand that even in the darkest moments, he is preparing something grand. So, when you feel lost or betrayed, remember Joseph's story. God can transform any situation for the good of those who love him. Enjoyed this journey through Joseph's life? Leave your comment about this inspiring story, and if you want to know more about other biblical figures, keep following us. Until next time.